Tonight on Talking Politics, we're taking a closer look at ballot questions 3 and 4 on alcohol licenses and driver's licenses for unauthorized immigrants. Evan Horowitz of the Center for State Policy Analysis at Tufts is back with a neutral and nonpartisan look at which claims from supporters and opponents are true and which ones don't hold up. But first, Charlie Baker's time in office is running out, and in his final months as governor, he seems to be leaning into his lame duck status and throwing some of his classic political caution to the wind. That includes another round of pardons earlier this week, a rare example of the governor exercising this particular executive power, and his decision to offer jobs back to about 50 state employees who were fired for refusing to get the COVID vaccine, citing a review of their medical and religious exemption claims. Then Wednesday, Baker's administration sent a pointed letter to Boston Mayor Michelle Wu about the state's efforts on the mass incarceration crisis after Wu had said this on Radio Boston.
We really need the state to step up. We've done the calculations. We know that this works for individuals. The city of Boston, as an individual municipality with the funding that we have, is not able to serve the tremendous amount of need that continues growing.
That letter from Health and Human Services Secretary Mary Lou Sudders outlined in great detail everything the state's already done to help the city handle the crisis, citing HHS efforts behind some of the city's temporary housing, more than $40 million in funding from the legislature, and pointing to an additional $5 million in opioid settlement money Boston could put toward mass incarceration. Sudders also seemed to question the city's interest in working with the state on this, writing, until the city disbanded its regular coordinating meeting on mass incarceration in September, key staff from my office and the Department of Public Health were active participants. And on Boston Public Radio yesterday, Baker told GBH News he personally directed Sudders to send that letter.
I just wanted to set the record straight because I have a legislature that gave me $40 million to spend on this stuff, and we did.
Joining me to discuss are Lisa Kashinsky, author of Politico's Massachusetts Playbook, and Mike Deehan, co-author of the daily newsletter from Axios Boston. Good to see you both. Lisa, why do you think Wu called out the Baker administration on this issue at this point in time, and what do you make of the Baker administration's response, which includes, as we just saw, the governor sounding pretty hot about accusations from the mayor?
Well, so Boston Mayor Michelle Wu maybe needs some help at mass incarceration right now. She had gotten kind of a string of not so great headlines about it. Again, people coming back to the area. It was all over, TV on WCVB and in some of the newspapers. So she was both stepping up pressure on the current administration to maybe try and work with them a little bit more. I'm not sure quite all of the ins and outs of their working relationship. Yeah. But what she's also doing, which is really interesting, is setting expectations for the next administration. Obviously, we're about to come up on an election here. There's going to be a new governor. And what she's doing is really publicly going out there and saying, this is what I think the city of Boston needs to really help the people struggling with homelessness and substance use down at Mass and Cass. And she's doing it in these press conferences, on these radio shows, where the hosts will remember this. She's setting these benchmarks that then people can go back and ask the next governor about when they're in office. And so she's really kind of setting this bar, whether they meet it or whether it's just, a starting point for some negotiations.
And what did you think of the Baker administration's pushback, including that clip that we saw just a moment ago? Were you struck by the overall tone like I was?
I was, yeah. It's not that often that you see the Baker administration really push back on this, but also it's not the same bromance or I guess very nice relationship since it's, not Marty Walsh anymore, that he used to have with Boston's mayor. And you did see this a little bit in the state's COVID response when people would challenge the Baker administration on that, which I think some people have forgotten about.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not something that's unprecedented, but maybe something we're just not used to. Mike, this dynamic that's at play at Mass and Cass, where you've got a regional crisis with one city, in particular one part of a city, paying an inordinate price for that crisis. That's been at play, as Lisa mentions, going back to the Walsh administration. Was there ever this sort of tug of war over who has responsibility and who should be doing what in the Walsh years? And if so, did it just happen behind closed doors as opposed to bubbling out into the open?
It certainly was going on during the Walsh years. I think the point that Baker made on the radio the other day is that he was given $40 million from the legislature, and he applied that $40 million. Goes to show that Wu is not just targeting the executive branch when she says the state needs to do more. She's talking about the financial resources of the city of Boston. She's implying that there needs to be more money. Well, who controls the money is the legislature. Yeah. So she is definitely sending a message not only to the Boston delegation to get us some more funds through this budget process, and the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee is a Boston representative, Erin Michowicz from the North End. She's saying that the new governor needs some more money in that budget to spend on Boston because this is a regional crisis. These are not simply Bostonians who are accumulating and being attracted to the area and setting up there. These are people from the suburbs, from all over the state, from other states as well, who are being attracted to this. So, when it's a money problem, it is certainly something to look at the legislature, not just the two principals, not just the mayor and the governor, but the speaker and the Senate president as well.
It'll be really interesting to see how this plays out when we head into next year, and there is a new administration in place. Governor Baker is also looking to play kingmaker in a couple notable races here in Massachusetts as his term draws to a close, including the auditor's race, Anthony Amore, the Republican running against Democrat Diana DiZoglio, and the Bristol County Sheriff's race. I want to show a brief Facebook ad that a Charlie Baker affiliated super PAC ran recently for Anthony Amore. Let's take a look.
Vote Anthony Amore for auditor, the only statewide candidate endorsed by Charlie Baker.
Again, that's a Facebook ad showing the picture of Baker and Amore happy together that Amore had wanted to put on the Mass GOP candidates website, but was not allowed to by the Mass GOP. Lisa, the polls suggest that this is a pretty close race, probably the Republicans' best chance at winning some kind of statewide office this election cycle. How far is Baker going to be willing to go to boost Amore, and where might he draw the line?
Well, it looks like right now he's drawing the line on actually cutting a television ad for Anthony Amore and maybe giving him some money to help get Anthony on air. Baker's done a lot of fundraisers for Anthony Amore, but remember, this is an auditor's race. It's, pretty far down the ballot of these statewide races. So there's not as much money coming in from, Baker's typical donors. They're more focused on, higher up the ticket, who the next governor is going to be. And when Anthony Amore was on doing an interview with Ted Nesi with WPRI earlier this week, he was asked if Baker was going to cut a TV ad for him. And he said, Baker will be on digital for me, but didn't mention TV. Maybe it's because polls, even though this is the closest of the Democratic statewide races, do show Anthony trailing by 15 to 17 points. I'm
glad you mentioned that, and I would think there'd be a certain point at which the governor might say it's actually not going to make me look great if I go really hard on this one and my preferred candidate loses. Mike, as I mentioned a moment ago, the governor and his super PAC are also backing Bristol County Sheriff Thomas Hodgson, who's trying to fend off a pretty tough challenge from former state rep Paul Hero, the current mayor of Attleboro. Hodgson seems like a strange choice for the governor to throw his support behind. The governor likes to talk about the need for moderates on both sides of the aisle who are fiscally responsible. Hodgson is not a political moderate. He's a great big fan of former President Donald Trump, as some viewers will remember, offered to send his inmates down to the border to build Trump's wall with Mexico, even though that didn't pan out. What do you think is going on with Baker getting behind Hodgson in this race?
I think it could be as simple as the fact that Hodgson kind of stayed on Team Baker during this civil war within the Mass GOP. Baker has been in a struggle to maintain some kind of control over the party he ostensibly is the leader of, at least the second 4 years of his term in office here. And if you look at that PAC spending, it's a lot of Baker allies or people that stood with the governor in his kind of tough times and his challenging political times. And now that's how these PACs work. It's time for Baker to wrap up his political, donorship, so to speak. And Hodgson is, yes, much more conservative than the governor, but he was never really on that kind of Jeff Deal, Jim Lyons side of the party fracture.
Yeah, that's something that strikes me as really significant, to have the most successful, very conservative Republican in Massachusetts not piling on the governor, given what's happened over the past few years. I would imagine would elicit some gratitude. I should note that the governor was asked about getting behind Hodgson again on Boston Public Radio yesterday, and here's what he had to say.
I've known Sheriff Hodgson for a long time, and there are lots of things that he and I don't agree on. But one of the things I appreciate about the sheriff is he tells me what he thinks when I don't agree with him. I tell him what I think when I don't agree with him, and then we both have the ability to move on. He's never been one to shut down the dialogue and the conversation because of what we don't agree on.
So there may be some new criteria for candidates who Baker Super PAC will support in the future. Lisa, you wrote in your Politico newsletter about the governor's decision to bring back a few dozen employees who'd lost their jobs because they refused to get vaxxed, and you suggested that this move by Baker late in his tenure could pose problems for the next governor, who seems likely to be Democrat Maura Healey. Why might it be problematic for a Healey administration?
Well, he kind of opened this can of worms by bringing back some folks who had lost their jobs over his own vaccine mandate. But it's also because on the same day that this happened, there was a ruling out of New York where a state judge ordered the city to bring back some workers who had also been fired, lost their jobs over the city's vaccine mandate. So both of these things have given groups, the Union State Police Association of Massachusetts and some others, that had challenged the Baker administration over his vaccine mandate in the first place. A spokesman for SPAM told me that, they are now exploring their legal options, seeing if there are any openings that maybe weren't available to them before because of both of these things. And he also hinted at, this is a fight, this is maybe a legal thing that could end up spilling into the next administration. And basically by doing this now, kind of October surprise, not just for the election, but just getting late in Baker's, last few weeks in office, this means that when Healey comes into office in January, she could end up facing some pressure, at least politically, if not legally, to maybe re-examine this a little bit sooner in her administration than she might have otherwise.
I hadn't thought of any of those implications, so I'm glad you detailed them. And that, too, will be really interesting to watch, especially depending on where we are in maybe a new COVID surge at that time. Mike, you get the final question today. In Deval Patrick's after Deval Patrick ended his second term in office, my sense is he largely kind of stayed out of Massachusetts politics. I'm wondering what you think the governor's intentions are, whether it's as a kingmaker or possibly as a future candidate, based on what we're seeing from him as we head toward Election Day and his term wraps up. Do you expect him to be one way or another flexing his muscle in the years to come?
I do not expect him to be on a ballot anytime soon, to put that bluntly. I think electoral politics has never been his strongest suit. He's been successful at it, but it hasn't been his favorite thing to do. I'll put it that way, at least as it appears. I don't think he wants to really be too involved in Republican politics as they are right now, and he doesn't want to leave the party. So that kind of leaves the latter suggestion there as playing kingmaker. I definitely think he has potential to be a leader in the non-Trump, I won't say anti-Trump, but non-Trump wing of the Republican Party at a national level. However that shakes out leading into the next presidential election, we'll see how much motivation there is to have figures like that on a national level. He wants to get stuff done. He is not the retiring type. I think he will stay active in public affairs in one way or another. We should definitely keep an eye on this PAC spending, for instance, is one place where Baker could kind of assert himself going forward, either at the state level or nationally.
Okay, Mike Deehan, Lisa Kashinsky, thank you both. Next up, we're taking a deep dive into ballot questions 3 and 4 on the Massachusetts ballot. In a minute, I'll be joined by a nonpartisan researcher who will help us cut through the spin from the yes and no campaigns and work out what will really happen if these measures are implemented. But first, let's take a look at the basics, courtesy of Soraya Wintersmith.
What would question 3 on the Massachusetts ballot do? Question 3 would change the state's alcohol licensing rules in a few different ways. First, it would gradually double the number of liquor licenses a single retailer can have for its chain of stores, going from the current 9 to 18 by the year 2031. Second, it would limit the so-called all-encompassing licenses to 7. So if a retailer wants to sell beer, wine, and hard liquor, it could only do that at 7 of its 18 locations, and that's assuming it got the maximum number of licenses. Third, it would ban self-checkout for alcohol purchases, so only face-to-face transactions. Fourth, it would make fines more expensive for retailers that sell things other than alcohol if they violate state law. And last but not least, it would let people use out-of-state licenses as proof of age to buy alcohol. So a yes vote would make all of those changes I just outlined, and a no vote keeps things as they are now. Now, supporters say this is a compromise measure. It ensures packies can keep selling alcohol into the foreseeable future, while also acknowledging that the public wants the convenience of buying alcohol in different places, like grocery stores and convenience stores. Opponents argue the changes do little to promote real competition or consumer choice, and that the changed fines would unfairly penalize retailers that sell things other than alcohol. They also say this is just a Band-Aid that doesn't do enough on other aspects of liquor license reform, like license quotas and local oversight rules. And to that end, question 3, if it does pass and the laws do change, cities and towns still get the final say over who gets a liquor license in their jurisdiction. So, if you want retailers to potentially have more opportunities to sell liquor, to limit combo beer and liquor licenses, to ban self-checkout for alcohol, to charge stores that sell things beyond alcohol more if they're fined, and to let people use out-of-state IDs to buy alcohol, you vote yes on question 3. If you want things to stay just as they are now, you vote no.
That was Soraya Wintersmith reporting. Evan Horowitz, the executive director of Tufts Nonpartisan Center for State Policy Analysis, joins me now. Evan, thanks for being here again.
It's great to be here with you.
So what...
This is democracy at its best.
That's us. We saw Soraya's gloss and GBH's gloss on this ballot question, GBH News. Is there anything that you would draw to the fore or that maybe you would add that we didn't pick up on in there?
One thing that's hard to assess from these kind of summaries is like, how big a deal is this? You know, is this a really big deal? Is it going to mean people drinking more, have access to more alcohol? And, you know, the short answer to that is like, no, this is not a big deal, right? This is not really going to change the landscape of alcohol consumption in the state or the availability of alcohol. That's just not what this is about. And one way you know this is that the big alcohol distributors, the people who sell, they don't care. They're not in this spending big money on yes or no. Like, that's just not what this is about.
So who is spending big money on yes and no? If the distributors don't really care, who does?
Well, there's actually not a lot of big money in this at all. This is one of the kind of smaller money issues. But it's the kind of package stores, the independent liquor stores, they're sort of behind it because they think of it as a kind of compromise position. And the chain stores, they're sort of against it because even though they might get more beer and wine licenses out of it, it's not as many as they want and they think they can do better.
When you say chain stores, are we talking grocery stores that might want to sell or big retailers like Total Wine and whatever they're called?
I was thinking more
liquors?
like the kind of Cumberland Farms and the grocery store types. The wine and spirit stores are also there. They also feel like this is not great for them. But either way, these are small changes, and we're going to see this again. Like, this is not the final word. Voters will vote on this. There will be another push for a ballot question on this in 2 years.
Okay, so while people are watching this show tonight, I may be watching and enjoying a delicious beer. I enjoy, you know, a tasty beer on occasion.
Something other than an IPA.
Yes, it's nice to get out of that box on every now and then. So if I want to have more variety, if I, you know, go to my local liquor store and I think sometimes this is the same stuff. I've tried all this stuff before. Why don't they have new things? How should I vote on this?
Oh, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter?
No. You can't vote on that basis, right?
Okay.
It's really not going to change your ability to get access to like a wider variety of products. That's not going to happen. I think if your thinking is like, actually, there's just like one Cumberland Farm down the street, or there's one place down the street that I know they really want it, and I know my town is open to new liquor license, beer and wine licenses, maybe that's a yes, but it's a really rare circumstance that the towns control this, not the state licenses.
I think I know the answer to this question based on everything you've said, but also no difference when it comes to price, if I want to be able to maybe pay nothing?
No. See, this is nice, because like some of these are
high
stakes questions, and you have to, and the nice thing about this is you can spend time thinking about it, but it's a relatively low stakes question. You shouldn't spend too much time thinking about it.
All right, let's move on to a much higher stakes question. Ballot question 4, which will determine whether a new law that will let unauthorized immigrants get driver's licenses starting next year is going to stay on the books. I put together an explainer on this. Let's take a look and then come back and talk about it. What will question 4 on the Massachusetts ballot do? Question 4 will decide the fate of a new state law that would let immigrants get a driver's license, even if they don't have permanent legal status. They just have to pass a test and provide documents proving their identity and residency. A yes vote would let that expanded license access start in July. A no vote would stop the law from going into effect, meaning no licenses for immigrants who don't have permanent legal status. The legislature passed the law a few months ago over a veto from Governor Charlie Baker, and its supporters say giving more immigrants access to licenses will help people who are already here do essential things like driving to work and school. They also say it'll increase public safety, citing reduced hit-and-run rates in states with similar laws and support from dozens of local police chiefs. The law's opponents say it extends a crucial privilege to people who don't deserve it. They also say the RMV doesn't have the expertise to vet documents from around the world. And they warn that because Massachusetts automatically registers driver's license applicants to vote, the new law could result in people who shouldn't be able to vote casting ballots. For the record, the law says the RMV and Secretary of State shall, quote, establish procedures and may promulgate regulations to make sure that doesn't happen, but it doesn't say what they'll be. So, if you want immigrants without permanent legal status to be able to get a driver's license, vote yes on question 4. And if you don't want them to get one, vote no. Evan Horowitz, let's start by talking about the safety piece, which is an argument that the proponents are really focused on as we head down the home stretch. Is there evidence, based on what's happened in other states, similar moves, that allowing unauthorized immigrants to get driver's licenses, if they can provide documentation, that it will increase public safety? There's some limited evidence there, so I think you should have some reasonable expectation that there's some improvement in safety, mostly on the reduction in things like hit-and-run accidents. Not because there are fewer hits, but because there are fewer runs. You can imagine that someone's here who is driving illegally because they don't have a license. And lots of these people are already driving, right? If you're here as an unauthorized immigrant, you still have to live your daily life in Massachusetts, and that's hard to do without driving, so they're driving. But you can imagine if you get into a fender bender, you might not stick around because you don't want to get embroiled with police, possibly deportation issues, so you take off. This could change that. So the safety issues, think of it there, it's more kind of tracking and enforcement. Total accidents, probably not much of a change. Just to highlight that, so there isn't evidence based on other states that by getting to know the rules of the road, by being brought into our system, that therefore there will be fewer accidents? No, in fact, the people looking at this find basically no change in kind of total accidents, but more people have insurance, so that's good. There are some reasons to embrace it on the safety side, but not because it makes the road safer in terms of total accidents. One of the big objections, as you know from people who don't like this new law, is they say that's going to create a real chance that people who shouldn't be voting will be able to vote. Is that a risk? No. This is one of these things we spend a lot of time looking into. We talk to folks in other states. There are a lot of other states already doing this, right? We would be the 17th state essentially doing this. So we're not the vanguard here as we are with some of the other ballot initiatives, question 2. This is a well-known thing, so you can call, as we did, folks at the DMV or in Secretary of State's offices in other states and say, hey, have you had any problems with this? And the answer is no, no. They find the rules, they make the implementation, they ensure that people can get licenses and not vote. And one good reason to think this is we already have people in the state who are eligible to get licenses and not vote. Right. Green card holders,
green card holders,
permanent residents.
So it's not like we have to create a system for ensuring this. The system exists. Just so I'm clear on this, in the states where you've been told this is not a problem, or the states that have told you that, are they states that do automatic voter registration via RMV transactions like we do? They are? Yeah, they are. Okay. The RMV screws things up on occasion. Earlier this year, some RMV employees were fired for giving 2,000 people who had not taken road tests driver's licenses. And they got caught and they got canned. But is that possibly, even if it's not going to happen automatically, like the Mass GOP has been saying, is it reasonable for some people who are concerned about this to say, yeah, but what if the RMV doesn't do its job right? Or what if the Secretary of State and the RMV don't actually follow through on this part of the law that says they're going to implement procedures to make sure that doesn't happen? Are those valid concerns, do you think? I mean, they're already valid concerns because you could go in and give licenses to the wrong people or mishandle records. And so, yeah, do I think that's a unique reason to oppose this as opposed to any other RMV regulation? No, I don't think so. I do think there are concerns around kind of record maintenance and retention, right? Because one of the things that this will do is create a record of unauthorized immigrants in Massachusetts who go and get driver's licenses. And the RMV will have to hold and store and safeguard those records. The law requires them to safeguard those records and to do so in a way that doesn't say, hey, these people are not citizens. But it's not clear they have the systems really to do that and prevent leaking of this information or subpoenaing or maybe working with a future federal administration that's interested in tracking these people. So I think that's another risk.
Interesting. Correct me if I'm wrong here. My understanding is that the law allows the RMV to share that information on citizenship status with towns and cities if the point is making sure that voting is executed correctly and the people who shouldn't be able to vote don't vote. Am I correct about that?
So my read is the RMV is not actually going to identify citizenship status on these things. What it will identify is not eligible to vote. And so that record, is this person eligible to vote, is shareable in certain cases, but not are they citizens. And they might be 17. Right? There are other reasons you might not be eligible to vote. So it won't necessarily be a record of your legal status.
Governor Baker has said that the RMV doesn't have the expertise to vet all these different forms of identification that they're going to be looking at from pretty much every country imaginable. Is he right to be concerned about that?
So this is another question we asked folks in DMVs in other states, and they said, no, this is a solvable problem, this is a manageable issue, especially when the universe of documents is relatively limited. It's not like you can bring any document in. At least one of these documents has to be either a foreign passport or a consular ID. So they're recognizable. You can get a book, like you get with driver's licenses. What do these things look like? And with some additional training, that seems like a manageable and solvable problem. Or the RMV is beyond incompetent. Like, if that problem can't be solved, then you have much deeper problems with the RMV that need to be solved.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I think it does, yeah. The governor and other opponents have also said, hey, wait a second, other states that have allowed undocumented immigrants to get licenses, give them a different kind of ID. They don't give them the same license that everyone else has. Is that true?
I think that varies. There are 16 cases. I think it varies. But I think there are other states that do it the way we do. That is, we have a federal ID, the Real ID program. We have a non-federal kind of state ID program. And bringing unauthorized immigrants into that non-federal state ID program is actually a very smooth way to implement this, because it ensures that they can participate in a license program, they can get a license from the state, and that license doesn't scream, hey, you're in this country illegally, right? It doesn't scream that. It says, no, you're just one of these people who decided to get a state license without a real ID. So in some ways, I think that's actually the preferable divide, and
Okay, Evan Horowitz, thank you for all of this. I'm going to have to rewatch our conversation because there's a ton of stuff here I need to make sure I'm
Well, look, if you want to talk more, you can always give me a call. I'm happy to share.
All right, sounds good. Appreciate it. Evan Horowitz, thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Al.
You can find last week's episode covering questions 1 and 2 and more GBH News coverage of the 2022 ballot initiatives on our website, gbhnews.org. That is it for tonight, but before we go, a reminder, early in-person voting is going on right now through November 4th. Some of you may have already sent in your mail-in ballots. If you still need one, you've got a few days left to get in your application, but sooner is always better, so act quickly. And those ballots, remember, must be returned to a drop box or local election office by 5 p.m. on Election Day or postmarked by the same day. And if you plan on voting the old-fashioned way, polls will be open statewide from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. on November 8th. For more info, you can head to sec.state.ma.us. And as always, please tell us what you think. The email's talkingpolitics@wgbh.org. The website is gbhnews.org/talkingpolitics. Or you can find me on Twitter. I'm @ReillyAdam. For now, thanks as always for watching, and good night.
Each night on Greater Boston, we go in-depth on important stories. We talk to the people behind those stories, and we bring you expert insight and a wide array of views on issues which you care about and which you should. Greater Boston, Monday through Thursday at 7.
It's critically important to remember